Well, welcome to Strasburg Community Church. On July 29th, we had the opportunity to share that video with our church family to let you know about our desire to start a Christian school here along the I-70 corridor. Since that time, we've spent countless hours in discussion, in prayer, in conversation, both in groups and one-on-one with individuals such as yourself, both here at the church and outside in the community as well. And the purpose that we are here today to do is to share a little bit more specifically about what that vision looks like, about what the plan for starting a Christian school here out of Strasburg Community Church looks like. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Steve Musser. I'm the assistant pastor here at Strasburg Community Church, and I want to welcome you all to our informational session. The last one that we're having, we've had two other ones the last two Saturdays, and it's been great to just get the feedback, get the comments, the critique from people just like yourselves. Many of you have already been to both of those meetings, and so I applaud you for that effort. And today is going to be just another special time of sharing what God has laid on our hearts as a church, as leadership, as elders, as pastors, and people that desire to just follow God's will in what He has for the future of Strasburg Community Church. So this morning we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different things. We're going to share with you our philosophy for education. We're going to talk about the leadership of the school, the financial aspects of things, what the schedule, what the impact is going to look like, and the long-term goals that we have. And then at the end of all of that, sharing all of that, we're going to open up the floor for a time of questions and answers. So if you have questions that you would like to ask us, I'd encourage you to take notes, write things down. There are some note cards and some pins back there by the double doors. Feel free to slip up and grab one of those. There's also coffee and water out of the lobby if you'd like to get a cup. But I would ask you that you would hold all of your questions until the end. That way we have the opportunity to get through the entire presentation, and hopefully we'll even answer some of your questions before you have a chance to ask them. So, like I said, on July 29th, we had the opportunity to share that video with our church. And that was a long process in the making, almost a year of time and effort spent of seeking out God's will and asking God, what do you want for us? What do you want for Strasburg Community Church? And then what does your preferred future look like for us? And how can we make the most impact here along the I-70 corridor? Well, this process for us started, like I said, a little over a year ago when Steve and I began to have apprehensive conversations about what God would want for us. And I remember walking into Steve's office one day and saying, Steve, I got something I think we need to talk about, something that's been laid on my heart, and I'm apprehensive to share it with you, but I can't ignore it anymore. And I remember sitting down in his office, and I said, you know what, I've been praying and thinking a lot about this, and I'm wondering if God wants us to start a Christian school here in Strasburg Community Church. And Steve's response to that was, yeah, that's not what I want to talk about at all. And we kind of shared a little bit of a laugh, and his next words out of his mouth were something to the extent of, because I kind of feel the same way. And it's one of those things that as we talk about it and converse about it in his office, we kind of came to the realization that was something that God was kind of laying on both of our hearts, separately, individually, but it kind of got to a place where we couldn't keep it to ourselves anymore. We had to start talking with each other. Well, that led to further conversations with our elders and sharing our hearts with them and asking them what they thought. And it was beautiful to see the way that God works and how He had already been working in the lives and hearts of our elders to kind of say the same thing. But like Steve and I, we were all kind of apprehensive to share that because, you know, when you lay those kind of cards on the table, you better have a good hand, right? Well, a little bit later, after kind of starting those conversations, we received a random email from a complete stranger that lived in California. A lady by the name of Hillary James had emailed us and said, I live in California. I'm a Christian school principal, and my family and I are looking to move out to Colorado. And when we get there, I'd really like to start a Christian school because I feel that's what God's calling me to do in Strasburg. And I'm just reaching out to other churches in the area to see if you might, by any chance, feel the same way. And so we started a conversation with Hillary, who I'll bring up on the stage here in a few moments, about what that would look like. and her experience, her expertise on the matter, and her experience with having started Christian schools and led Christian schools in California. And it began to just kind of blossom into a beautiful friendship, a beautiful conversation of what God can do when we dream big, about what God can do when we look to Him for guidance and direction in our lives. So fast forward a little bit further, we've been continuing to have conversations at a leadership level, the pastors and elders and a few other people involved in that, as well as Hillary. And we got to the month of May or June, I don't recall, where we kind of came to a place at a leadership level where we said, we've been talking about this for so long. We've been having enough discussions about this. I think it's time that we finally make a decision. But before we do that, I think we really need to just commit ourselves to prayer. And so we agreed, the pastors and elders, to spend 1 month of prayer, just solidly going before God and asking God, what is your will, what is your desire, and all of this. And at the end of that month, we would reconvene and then just answer that question. And so we spent an entire month praying separately, praying together, praying in many different facets. And then we finally got together after the end of that month in Jim's living room, just looking at each other, saying, okay, guys, what did God say to you? What did God lay on your heart? Where did God lead you in all of this? And going around the room, it was, again, just wonderful to see how God had kind of given that affirmative answer to each person in that room. To say, you know what? Yes, we believe that this is where God is leading us. And it's a scary thing, because the reality is this is not necessarily an endeavor that anyone in their right, sane mind would want to undertake to start a school. It's huge. It's big. It's beyond our comprehension and even our expertise to some degrees. But you know what? We recognize that when God moves, when God calls us to something, we have a responsibility as Christ followers to answer. And so we found at the end of that month, at the end of that meeting, that you know what? That's exactly what God had been leading us to do, to start a Christian school out of our church to serve the needs and the children and the families along the I-70 corridor. So that brought us to July 29th, where again we shared that video and had the opportunity to make that announcement to our church family to say this is where God is leading us. This is our big, hairy, audacious prayer, as Steve likes to call them, that we've been praying about, and we're finally sharing this with you. And then that finally brings us to today, in the last 2 weeks, where we've had the chance to just share this vision, these plans that God has laid on our heart about what it looks like to start a Christian school here along the I-70 corridor. And so that's what you're here today to learn more about. What that looks like, and how you can be involved, and what the impact looks like on our church. One of the questions that often gets asked is why would you want to start a Christian school? Well, I think there's a lot of typical responses that churches often have. One of those responses is that there's poor or not enough educational opportunities that exist in our area. For us, we would answer that question and say, no, that's not true. At least we don't believe it is. We believe that the schools that exist here in Strasburg and Bennett and Byers and Deer Trail and beyond are very good quality schools with very good education. We know many of the teachers and the staff that work at these schools. Some of them attend our church here and other churches in the area. And we're confident that the education that's provided children and families in the area here is a very good, high-quality education. So for us, that's not our reason for wanting to start a Christian school. Another typical response is that we would start a Christian school because it's a response to something that the public schools have done or said. And again, we say no to that because for all intents and purposes, there really hasn't been anything that public schools have done that would cause us to raise concern. Certainly there's things that as Christians, as Christ followers, we wouldn't agree with, but there's really been nothing egregious that would cause us to raise a red flag and say, wait a second, we need to do something about this. Another typical response is that there's too much secularism that exists within the public schools. Well, as a Christian, yeah, there is. Okay? There's a lot of things that come out of the public schools that we don't agree with, that are not in alignment with our beliefs and what our scriptures say. But at the same time, we also recognize that there is a lot of Christ-following, God-honoring teachers that exist within the public schools, both at a teacher level and an administrative level. And based on all of the interactions that we've had, that's always been found favorable when we've come to them and said, hey, what can our church do and how can we be involved in the public schools? They've always welcomed us with open arms. So while there might be a little bit too much secularism in the public schools, not enough that would cause us to raise a red flag because they keep us at bay. Another typical response is that starting a Christian school is simply what a church should do. Well, again, that's not something that we agree with. Not all churches have been called to start Christian schools, and we don't really think that that's just what every church should do, because if they did, well, there'd be a lot of Christian schools around here. For us, the way that we would respond to why do we want to start a Christian school is simply because we feel God has led us to this decision. We feel that God has laid this on our hearts, and He's called Strasburg Community Church to step out in faith, to do something that is bigger than we have ever done before, to step out in faith, to start something that's going to make a positive impact on future generations through Christian education. Our desire is to provide quality, high-quality Christian education to students and family that are in need, to help them to cultivate a biblical worldview so that they have the opportunity to look at the world around them and say, how would God respond to this situation? What would God do in these times? And how can I share the gospel message with other people that I come across? And then also our desire as a church is to start a Christian school that would help to develop godly character and attributes in the lives of our children and in their families so that they can make the most positive impact for the cause of Christ. So that's why we want to start a Christian school, because we feel that God has led us to this point, because we feel very strongly that God has laid this on our hearts to do this. And so we're excited. We're excited to see what God has in store for us. We're excited to see how He can possibly use this endeavor to further His gospel message along the I-70 corridor. And we're excited to see how our church can continue to grow and make an impact for the cause of Christ out of Strasburg Community Church. So that's why we want to start a Christian school. And again, that's what we're here to share with you this morning, or this afternoon. So at this point, I would like to invite Hillary James up to the stage, and she is going to share a little bit about herself, as well as talk about what the education might look like in our school.
Thank you, Steve. So my parents are here in spirit. They're Skyping right now on my phone. So my name is Hillary James, as Steve mentioned. And it's been a long journey, lots of faith, lots of steps of faith to get us to this point. And I'd like to kind of share a little bit about myself before I begin. I grew up in a Christian home, two loving parents. I hear my mom crying on the phone right now. But I have 3 siblings, and we're all very close. In California, we live within 5 minutes of each other. Very tight-knit, close family. My dad is one of the head in a department at a UC hospital in California. My mom was in education, and then when she had us 4, she decided to stay home and homeschool us for part of the time, as well as send us to Christian school, but be a stay-at-home mom. I met my husband in high school. We got married when I was 18. We now have 2 kids, 10 and 7. And when I had kids, I really had this burden of trying to find what education would look like in our home, what education looks like for my kids, for us. And so I began the research that needed to happen to decide what my kids were going to do when they turned 3 to go to preschool. And my husband's like, it's way too early, they're little. And I'm like, nope, I'm starting now. And so I did that. And I felt my dad was a nurse, and I felt like, I really need to go into nursing, and I felt a calling for that. So I started my education in nursing, and I became a CNA, a certified nursing assistant. And I, was gung-ho on that, and when my son turned 2 and a half, I started researching which school I was going to send him to preschool. And I would go to schools and leave crying, because within 2 minutes they would tell me, my son, well, what's wrong with him? He doesn't know how to read yet. He's 2 and a half, or he doesn't know his ABCs, and this is where he should be at this level. And I remember being so discouraged that they can judge him in 2 minutes without even knowing him. And so I really researched what school to send him to. And that brought me about an hour and 15 minutes away to a school called Lifestone. And it was a Montessori Bible-based school. And they went, at that time, up to 6th grade. And they were planning on adding a grade God wants you to be in education. He told me this, and you need to pray so he can tell this to you too. And I'm like, oh gosh, here we go. So I prayed, and sure enough, God laid it on my heart, like, yes, this is what you're called to do. And so I made a commitment and became the principal of that school, and worked there as a principal for 6.5 years, but I worked there for previous years from that. So it's really interesting just to see God's plan and how he shifted even my career goals and my goals for my life into what he wanted to have me do. So once I became the principal, I saw several things, holes in the education system of the place that I worked in, and so I worked for that. We increased enrollment in the first 2 years by 80%. We didn't really have a fundraising, anything for fundraising, so I developed some fundraising things, and we raised $500,000 in the first 4 years. I also began to research what are the best things that we can do for this school. And there are certain areas like Montessori that had great ideas, certain things that had great ideas, but not everyone had it all. So I kind of picked and chose little things from different forms of education, and we developed this program. And we ended up, God had a lot of favor on us. We were in several newspaper articles. We had several awards. I was asked to teach at the community college for teachers as well as parents, did workshops, guest speakers at conferences, different things like that. And it's hard for me to talk about that because I don't like to talk about myself. But I say that just to show that God, when you're committed to something that God has in your life, he will bless it. And so that kind of brings me to September 10th of 2016. I went to a teacher conference and came back, and I felt this gut feeling that God was telling us to close the Christian school. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've invested my life into this. This has been my calling, my ministry. My kids go to this school. I can't imagine it closing. And so I wrote down on a piece of paper on letterhead at my school that I said, close school, God, and I folded it up and put it away in my office and prayed about it. And I prayed for the next couple months, and I really felt like I needed some kind of confirmation that God would say, this is what I have. So I prayed this prayer saying, I need confirmation. If this is of you, tell my boss that we're meant to close the school and let her tell me. So I prayed about it. December came and went, and I'm like, okay, well, obviously, I kind of forgot about it. And we come back from Christmas break, and my boss says, Hillary, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, oh, that wasn't even on my mind, at that point. And she says, come in my office, or calls me in my office and says, let's talk. She goes, I think God is telling me to close the school. And of course, I just break down, oh my gosh, it's been, the last 8 months I've been praying about this, and look, I have this letter, it's stamped, it's dated, everything. And so we began the process to, for parents, shut down the school. And it was really hard because this is something that I had full faith that God had led me to, and I kind of felt empty. Like, what do I do next, God? So I started praying in December of 2017 at that point, that God would guide my steps. Like, where do you want me, God? If you want me to do something else, take away my passion for education. He didn't. He actually lit the fire back up under it, and my passion grew. So in the midst of that, my husband had a job offer to take over a family-owned business, our family business, in Strasburg. And so I thought, okay, well, if we're going to move out of state, I better start looking and start applying at Christian schools in that area. And I Googled it and found there were none. So I just thought, oh no, I can't move to this place, and my passion hasn't gone away. Do you want me in public? What do you want me to do, God? And I had this little thing, and as Steve mentioned, it's like, no, God, no. We know how much work that is. I know, I've done this scenario school, built it from, the ground up, and is this really what you're calling me to? I don't want to do this again. And he said yes. And so September of 2017, I did a mass email to all the churches in the corridor and said, hey, you don't know me, my name's Hillary. I feel like God's laid it on my heart to start a Christian school in the area. Do you feel the same? And I really felt like whoever I reached out to, it wasn't going to be a new thing to them. This was going to be something that they've prayed about, that they've thought about, and I was just going to be a missing piece of the puzzle. And so that kind of led us here at Strasburg Community Church. And funny, when I look back, they never told me that. They said, oh yeah, we're talking about it. But it wasn't until we actually met and talked that I found out how crazy it was that a couple weeks before they had been talking about it. And even moving here, it was a huge step of faith because in between me moving, June 2nd was the date that they met after their month of prayer. And so I didn't even know if they would have their month of prayer and come back and say, oh, absolutely not. So I just had to take a step of faith and say, God's calling us here and we'll see how it goes. So I moved here June 11th, and that's kind of when we started our journey to get all the information that you're going to see today and the things that we're excited to share with you. So, as a Christian school, the mission statement and core values are very, very important because these things, they keep us focused and it helps us keep in mind the bigger picture. So our mission statement that we have come up with is to provide students with an immersive educational experience that offers them a biblical worldview as a path to leadership, excellence, and character. So within that mission statement is our core values. So the first one is leadership. 1 Timothy 4:12 says, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. So we chose this verse when talking about leadership because I think a lot of times kids think of leaders as adults. And we really want to teach children that God calls us all to be leaders wherever we're at in our life and in our age. So teaching children that they can be leaders by their example that they set, how they live their life, the amount of drive that they put into their education that can also be shown in leadership. The other thing that one of our other core values is excellence. So Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So we believe that gifts and talents, God gave us all individual gifts and talents. And that can't be measured by A, B, C grades. We really need to cultivate whatever the talents that God's given us and given our children, and cultivate that so that they can really live the best life for Christ. We also believe in praising effort versus outcome. You may have two students and one tries kind of hard and gets an A, one tries really, 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 really hard. Maybe they get a C. We're going to praise because they stuck with it and they showed perseverance and grit in those tasks, and they did well. The other thing is godly character. So with character, we think, during the school day, there's so many situations and circumstances that happen where we can use that as an example of this is how Christ would have you act. If somebody takes something of yours, you don't hit them, you talk to them about it, use your words. So it really comes back to a relationship with Christ, because you can't have godly character without having a relationship with Christ, and that's really what we want to cultivate with these students. So within the mission statement and the core values, there are 4 hallmarks that we would incorporate into everything we do into the school. Cultivating a biblical worldview, as Steve mentioned before, meeting the needs of all learning styles, developmental learning, and small class sizes. So to cultivate a biblical worldview, I remember I would give tours to parents, and they'd say, well, can we opt out of the Jesus part? Can we just, we love the education part, but can we opt out of the Bible stuff? I'm like, I'm sorry, it's in everything we do. Kids have a bad day, we hug them, we pray for them. Kids says something out of anger, we bring them back to the Bible and say, hey, this is what God says about that, and there's consequences to your actions. So really, a biblical worldview is through creation science, teaching them that God created our hand, how amazing our hand is. When you look at that, how can you not see a creator? Through creation-based science and versus evolution-based science. So there's so many things in everything that we would do when we teach them how they can cultivate a biblical worldview. The other thing is, again, developing a relationship with them on Jesus. So many Christian education, they focus on the outward versus the heart. and really everything outward starts from the heart. So we really think that focusing on the heart will in turn make the outward Christ-like. The other thing that we think is very important is meeting the needs of all learning styles. So there's three main types. Over the last 10 years, they've actually come up with subdivisions of learning types and all these things, but three main types: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So visual is learning through seeing, auditory is learning through hearing, and kinesthetic is learning through doing. And we think that different children learn different ways, and we acknowledge that. I myself am a hands-on learner, and my mom, when she was homeschooling me, taught me very kinesthetic. But it was really hard for me when I went to college, and we had PowerPoint presentations and lectures, and it was hard for me to, okay, what are we going to do so I can learn? So I had to kind of reteach whatever they talked about. I had to relearn in a kinesthetic way or hands-on way. So we think even though those kids, all kids have ways that they learn best, to cultivate the other styles of learning and introduce them to those other styles of learning will really help them when they go on to other places so that they can comprehend whatever learning style is being introduced. It also helps students to grasp these concepts that may be a little difficult if it wasn't in their learning style that they would understand, and it helps them retain the information longer and actually learn whatever material that they're being taught. Now, a developmental learner is a critical thinker. Oftentimes we teach children what to think versus how to think, and I think that's the missing piece to the puzzle, really teaching them how to be critical thinkers, how to look at everything and bring it back to the Bible. What does God say about this? What does the Holy Spirit tell me about this? These are things that we think are really important, especially in young children, and we would like to implement that. Now, small class sizes, that's a big one. We really think that, I have so many teacher friends that I just feel so bad for them because they're overwhelmed with the amount of students, and they can't have one-on-one interactions with these students because there's, in California, there's 42 to 1, even in kindergarten, and it's insane. So we really want to cap the class size at a 15 to 1 ratio, and we feel adamant, we work that into the budget, which you'll hear a little later. We feel adamant that that will actually provide the best education for these students so that they can have a small class size and be one-on-one with a teacher more. And all these things that I mentioned, these 4 hallmarks, we want to apply them in practical ways. So I'll kind of mention the educational distinctives that we would like to have at our school. One is collaborative learning. So this basically, there's lots of technical terms for this and different methods that use this. It's basically working with a group. It's very important, I think, for kids, especially to learn how to listen to other students, how to gain other ideas, and then balance them of, okay, is that idea something I want to adopt, or is it something that's completely false? This sets them up for real life. When they have a job, they may have a group that they have to, stand up for what they believe in, and then also listen to other people and their ideas. So we think that a collaborative learning style is very important in the education process. It also helps auditory learners. This is the way we would incorporate auditory learning. When you're listening to other people, you're actually getting the hearing portion of that learning style. We also think that critical thinking, as I mentioned before, is really important. And I'll kind of go into the practical ways through STEM and other things that we would incorporate critical thinking. But critical thinking, we think, we critically thought about this, and we think critical thinking is really good. And so I'll go into detail of that in a little bit. The other thing is experiential application, really creating hands-on applications for kids to take what they learn in the classroom to realize, how does this apply to the real life? How can I live this out, and how can this math concept that seems completely foreign, how can this be, how can I use this as an adult? So that's really important as well. The 4-in-1 work week, we think, is really important. So basically, this is a phrase that we've coined, 4-in-1. And lots of big corporations that are doing extremely well, like Google and Apple, a lot of their offices have incorporated this philosophy of a 4-in-1. People get burned out when they're consistently, the 5-day work week. By Friday, how many of us are exhausted and we just want to go home and sleep? So sometimes a 4-day work week actually helps, and it helps students as well. And many of you who have young children may notice that, Deer Trail will give children an opportunity to kind of refresh on Friday. But we do understand that parents work and they need sometimes childcare for Friday. So we really want to incorporate a fun hands-on day on Friday. So this is where we'll do our science experiments and our drama clubs and different things like that so that kids can get really an immersive educational experience, and especially on Friday. What this also does is it helps the teachers. We can have a rotating Friday off. So this actually helps the teachers have that for work week as well, and it helps them give them a day that they can be with their families or get things done that they need to do and really be the best teachers that they can be. The other thing we're passionate about is non-traditional learning. So as Steve mentioned, the public schools in the area have quality education. They have quality teachers, lots of them I know personally, and I know that they are doing an amazing job. Non-traditional learning, there's a couple things that we would like to incorporate into the school that are a little non-traditional, and I'll explain those. One is mastery versus testing. So traditional education is test-based learning. So basically there is a subject, a teacher's given 2 weeks to teach this subject, the children are given 2 weeks to learn this subject. They do a lecture or maybe a hands-on activity, then they take some homework home, they do homework, they come back, they review, they work on this, and then they take a test at the end to see how well they did. Well, in that scenario, if I take a test and I'm 80%, I passed. You're 95, you're 90, and these all show that we are competent in these levels. Sal Khan, who is the maker of Khan Academy, creator of Khan Academy, which is a math education system that's online, and it has won many, many awards, and they think, the community and the education field thinks it's great. He was asked to speak at the TED convention, which is like a creative and the innovative thinkers of today. And he kind of gives an illustration that I love to use whenever I talk about education and mastery versus testing. So he basically says, most things that we do in life are mastery-based. If we learn karate, we start at a white belt, and we need to master everything on that white belt before we go on to the yellow belt, and so on and so forth. If you're taking a music lesson, you need to master that level of music before you move on to the next. Fortunately, education isn't structured that way in traditional education. So imagine if you're building a house and you say, okay, foundation, we have 2 weeks, and you tell the contractor, do what you can in 2 weeks. So they build the foundation, they put the cement, they lay the cement, and 2 weeks in, we're done. The inspector comes, they inspect the foundation, and they say, oh, well, this 20% over here is a little wet, some things are a little, but 80%, we're good to go, let's move on to the next level. And you continue to build on that shaky foundation, and eventually you get to a point where you've hit a wall, and your foundation is not stable, so you're going to collapse. We see that oftentimes in education as the concepts get more complex. Children at a certain level hit a wall and they can't, they're no longer competent in math or other subjects. This also creates a more individualized learning style, so you look at the child and where are they at and what level are they at. This also helps with if a child is doing exceptionally well in a subject to move them on to higher levels, even if maybe that time frame doesn't allow for that. So the Gurian Institute is something I've been trained in, and that's another thing that we would like to implement. It's basically research-based on more active movement in the school. So Gurian has done several brain scans and different, things, and they have them all on their website. You can take a look at that. Several naval academies implement this, their methods, and we would like to implement this as well into the school. Now, Finland was really low on the education in comparison to nations, and they implemented several innovative ideas, including more recess and more active play. Nowadays, a typical student in America gets about 30 minutes of active play for about 6.5 hours of study time. So what this shows is that there's actually less recess or less active movement and more education, and the studies unfortunately show that this is having an adverse reaction on students. The other thing we'd like to do is an innovative homework policy for the entire school. Lots of kids have 2 to 3 hours of homework sometimes a night in some school districts, and we think that no matter what grade or what teacher you have, you should have the same homework expectations. There's no studies that correlate homework and actual increased test scores. There are several studies that show that eating dinner with your family, having communication with adults and other students, these are the things that actually help in academics, and so we'd like to implement those things. So continuing on with our education, another way we'd like to incorporate our philosophy of education is through blended classrooms. So as I mentioned before, with a 1 to 15 ratio as the top, so this is 1 teacher to 15 students, we really think that that small class size can also help with blended class styles. So let's say you have a group of 12 students in one class with one teacher. You can have 6 first graders and 6 second graders. Now that teacher can work with that group of first graders, and then they can work with that group of second graders on their level. What this does, and studies have shown, that it helps the younger students or the students who maybe are struggling in some areas. It helps them actually, or I should say the older students that are struggling in some areas, that helps them hear the younger students' instruction without feeling ashamed or embarrassed, and it helps them review those concepts continuously so that they can keep up on their education and master whatever thing that they're learning. It also helps with the younger students overhearing the older students because they're hearing these more advanced concepts and they're going, wow, I'm hearing these terms and these concepts. And then when they get to those, it's just like a review. Oh yeah, I remember something about addition, or I remember something about that. Now children in this area in a blended classroom are not capped at their grade level. So if they're doing exceptionally well in math, they can continue on to that higher grade level or higher academic level. At the same time, it helps students who are struggling kind of get a review and maybe get into small groups with less advanced students so that they can review and fill in those holes in their educational gap. The last thing it helps do is helps the students that are older and have mastered certain things, helps them teach the younger students. And really, to show mastery, you have to be able to teach that and explain that to someone else. So we think that this will really help with that. Now, in 2005, Paula Carter describes in her article, The Modern Multi-Age Classroom. Children in a multi-age classroom showed marked improvement over the year versus children in a single-age classroom. This shows in their motor, cognitive, communicative, and other developmental areas. So Montessori has been doing this since the 1900s, early 1900s, and it's been shown to really work, and we would like to implement that into the school. So a way we can create leaders, as I mentioned, that was one of our core values in our next generation, is through STEM. So STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And many people say, well, I did math, I did science. And it's basically taking these 4 different disciplines and combining them so that children can have a connection between different subjects and really see real-world situations and how these things work. So what it does is it excites students about learning. It provides hands-on scenarios and then real-world experiences. According to ed.gov, in regards to STEM-related jobs, they are projected to increase by 2020. Math is expected to increase by 16%, computer analyst jobs by 22%, software developing jobs by 32%, medical science by 36%, and biomedical engineering by 62%. Really, to create leaders and innovators of the next generation, we need to have children who are competitive in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Albert Einstein said, "It's not that I am smart, it's that I stay with problems longer." And oftentimes, grit and perseverance is lacking when you have, a project and you have this amount of time to do and you have to finish it in this time. Robert Stevenson, who's been an educator for over 20 years and is an innovator in implementing STEM in several different classrooms across the U.S., he refers to a Thomas Edison quote. When Thomas Edison was asked by reporters, "How could you have failed 10,000 times?" Thomas Edison replied, "I didn't fail once. I found 10,000 ways that it didn't work." And Roberts asked the question, if Thomas Edison was around today in our traditional school setting, would he have tried and then been given an F because his assignment was late? Or would he have been acknowledged for his perseverance and his grit to continue on with a problem and see it till the end? So we think STEM really provides a hands-on education portion that they can really have creative and perseverance thinkers and critical thinkers. So how if you have this great philosophy, but you have teachers that believe the opposite, you can't accomplish these things. So we think it's really important that teachers not only agree with our faith statement, but also adhere to our educational philosophy. We prefer a bachelor's degree or higher in education, or an applicable field. So this is important because we prefer that, but there's lots of teachers maybe that taught in a Montessori school or a non-traditional school that have years of experience in Christian school but maybe don't have their bachelor's, and they'll be working towards that. We also believe in conducting federal background checks and then making sure that every single teacher is first aid and CPR certified. So looking beyond the classroom, as we heard about inside the classroom, and then outside of the classroom, we have strategic partnerships that we would like to create in the community. We would like to create an a la carte educational program where parents who still choose to homeschool their students, maybe they don't have access to technology or STEM or different things, can bring their children here and choose different electives for them to participate in. We'd also like to offer before and after school programs. We think this is important. This area really doesn't have a lot of options for that, and we know some parents need that longer care and in addition to the kids that are already here. We also would like to invest in our local ministry and community. We think it's really important to teach students that God calls us to give back, God calls us to serve, and creating that in young kids where we're teaching them, hey, this is something, it's not all about you, it's about the community, and giving them different lenses of different people and how different people live is really important. In our the school that I worked at, we twice a year the students did a project and they got to choose what ministry they would like to outreach. And it was really cool to see. One year they came up with a homeless ministry where they had to do research and they found out that giving homeless people money doesn't help, that giving them supplies and things like that actually help. So they did a bunch of fundraising, they got little packs, and they were able to give them and sell them to people that wanted to actually give supplies to homeless people. Another year, the last year that I was there, we had a student who had a family member, an uncle in the Marines, and he was stationed in Afghanistan. They found out how many, I know troops isn't the right word, but how many people were in their unit, and they reached out to the community and they did an adopt a Marine, and they actually filled, I think, I don't have the exact number, but it was a lot, over 100 Marine boxes, and they had supplies and everything in those boxes, and they were able to donate them to the Marines. And to see these kids realize life isn't all what I think it is. There's other people that are struggling, there's other people, and there's ways that I can give back even as a child. And this brings it back to our core value of being a leader in the community, and being a leader and an example for Christ. So one thing that's very important with all these things we mentioned is leadership. With a school like this, we need a solid group of leaders and governance. And that's what I'll talk about.
Thanks, Hillary. So we have big audacious goals, a mission that is grand, a desire to serve the needs of our children and our families in big ways, and see that we can play an active and vital role in setting them up for the future to make an impact for Christ. And for us, it's important to make sure that we stay on task, to stay focused on the bigger mission at hand. And so as a school, we want to make sure that we set up a structure that facilitates future growth and development while maintaining a solid focus on what God has called us to. So in order to do that, first off, we want to recognize that this school is a ministry of Strasburg Community Church. First and foremost, this is a ministry that comes from our church and will always be a part of our church, just like many other ministries that we engage in as well. So as a church family, as a church body, we will have a huge amount of involvement and stock in what we do as a school. Secondly, and I'll talk about this a little bit further, a little bit later, we're going to set the school up as a 501c3. We've consulted with some lawyers and accountants and asked them what's the best way to do this, and across the board they've all agreed that becoming a nonprofit organization for the school is the best way to do that. So as such, there's certain leadership and governance requires that we have to meet at a federal level to be a 501c3. And so we will be setting up a board of directors that will consist mainly of SCC members. Again, because it's a ministry of Strasburg Community Church, we want to make sure that the leadership comes directly from our church. So we'll be developing a board of directors that will primarily consist of SCC members. In addition to that, we'll also have leadership that is typical of a school. So we'll have a principal that runs things on a day-to-day basis and continues to move forward with the vision for the school. Because of her experience in being a principal at a school, we've already discussed this with Hillary, to become the principal for the school when we set it up for the future. And then also my role in all this will be kind of to work alongside the principal and the board of directors to make sure that we stay in alignment with not only the school's philosophy and the school's mission, but also that it stays in alignment with the church's mission and philosophies as well. And then also we'll have staff, faculty, and volunteers that are a large part of the leadership and governance of the school as well, because we want to make sure that people stay involved and stay active. Another thing that we also want to set up that we think is very important would be a parent advisory board. This would be parents who have children that are actively enrolled in the school that would come alongside the board of directors and the church and the principal as well to help guide and direct the educational programming and the direction that we're heading as well. So these would be parents that would have a very vested interest in what the school is doing, what the church is doing, and would like to play a more active role in the day-to-day operations as well to make sure that, again, that we continue to stay on track and heading in the right direction. So how are we going to do all this? Obviously, we have to finance this operation some way. We have to provide the finances to make this happen. And so what I want to share with you now is kind of our plans, our desires for how we plan on financing this. Well, when we looked at our financing and how we were going to make this happen, there was a few things that we wanted to keep in mind, kind of goals that we wanted to achieve. One of those goals is that we want to make sure the school is self-sustaining. We want to make sure that our school is not dependent on outside resources and finances for any part of its operation. We want to make sure that it can sustain its programs and that it can continue into the future as it builds and as it grows. We want to make sure that the tuition for the school is as low as possible, and I'll share that with you in a few moments. We also want to set goals for fundraising and donation so that we can possibly provide scholarships and tuition assistance for families and students in need. Part of developing our budget, however, is that we don't want to be dependent on that fundraising and donation portion. Many schools that you might come across, their budget is, a large part of their budget is based upon their ability to get funds and donations into the school. And while that certainly has a certain amount of merit to it, we don't want to develop a budget or operate our school that way, because obviously when you don't get the funds that you are budgeting for and the donations don't come in, then it's the parents and it's the children and the families that have to suffer because tuition goes up or other things take place. And so we want to work those funds in, those donations into our budget, but not to be dependent on them. And then lastly, a goal is to minimize the financial impact on SCC as much as possible as we work towards becoming self-sustaining. So how do we develop our budget? Well, one of the things that we did is we took a look at some national averages and statistics and research and found that the enrollment at a Christian school is typically reflective of around 10% of a school-age population in an area. So we went and took a look at the 2010 census, which was the last census that's been published. There's other ones that have been done, but the results have not been fully published yet. And so we looked at the 2010 census. We saw how many school-age children live in our area, taking an area from about Watkins to Deer Trail and that surrounding area. And we came up with an enrollment projection of around 40 students. Now, the school-age population in our area at the 2010 census was somewhere around 500 to 600 students. And as we all know, our area has grown significantly since then, and so that number is significantly higher. But we didn't want to inflate our enrollment numbers too high and then put ourselves in an awkward position. So when we developed our budget, again, it's based on an enrollment for our first year of 40 students that are paying for tuition. We also, looking at the budget, which I'll share at the next slide, we came up with an annual tuition of $5,500. When we had a chance to look at all the tuitions for private schools in the area, as well as in the entire state of Colorado, we wanted to try and put together a tuition that was comparable, but also reflected the economic statuses of individuals and families in our immediate area, and take that into consideration so as to not inflate the tuition too high. So what we have found is that at $5,500, our proposed tuition is actually going to be the lowest one in the area, and perhaps the lowest one in the state of Colorado. Now you can look at other schools, and up front their costs might look lower than $5,500, but a lot of those schools also factor in things like mandatory fundraising and donations that parents have to give, and so at the end, the cost actually ends up being significantly higher than $5,500. And so with our research that we've done, we feel very confident that the $5,500 tuition is a good tuition for what we are offering. We recognize that not all families are going to be able to provide for that. Also, families with multiple children might have a difficulty of being able to enroll their students into that. And we understand that. We want to try and make ways that they still can, again, through fundraising and donations to provide scholarships. And we want to try and find ways that we can work with families to get their students enrolled. So, what does the budget look like for us then? Well, going into our first year of operation, again, keeping in mind $5,500 for tuition and 40 students that are enrolled, we're going to be looking at an income of around $256,000 for tuition, and we're going to have expenses around $211,000. Now, those expenses cover the cost for salaries and taxes and employment things that we need to do. It's going to cover the cost of our startup needs for outfitting our classrooms, for curriculum and other things like that, which then gives us at the end of the year a difference of around $44,000. Now, looking ahead to the next 2 years after that, our desire would be to increase the number of students that we enroll while keeping the tuition at the same level, and then also, Lord willing, adding a grade each subsequent year so that we can continue to grow in our grade offerings. So one of the questions that I know people probably have is, well, looking at that difference of $44,000, $76,000, and $56,000, what are you going to do with that? Could we lower tuition or do some other things with that? Well, we want to plan for the future, and we want to continue to grow our school as much as possible, and again, become self-sustaining and not financially dependent on other entities, including the church. And so what we plan on doing with that difference there is investing it 100% into our educational programming, with the hopes that someday we'll have the chance to actually build a school that will outfit all of our educational programming. And so we want to be able to take that difference, put it in the bank, and let it grow for us so that we can use it at some point in the future to continue to grow our school as God allows us to. So looking at this first year of hopefully starting in fall of next year, which is what our goal is to start in fall of 2019. There's some startup costs that we're going to have, and we've broken those out incrementally. Between now and the end of the year, we are estimating that we're going to need around $14,000, and what that is going to cover is our ability to hire on our principal full-time so that Hillary can begin to develop the educational programming. That $14,000 is also going to go into the marketing pieces and development of a website and the materials that we're going to use to actually get the word out to people so they can learn more about our school. In January of next year, and then moving towards June of next year, we're looking at a cost of around $48,000, and this is going to help facilitate our hiring process, outfitting all of our classrooms, and then hopefully doing some pre-enrollment so that students and families can come take a look at what the school has to offer. This will also be part of developing our curriculum and selecting what that is going to be, as well as some other financial needs that we're going to have. And then in June, and from June to September of next year, a budget need of around $47,000. As for any of you that are in education, you know that preparing for the fall semester is easy and it only takes days to do. And so we want to make, that was a joke by the way, we want to be able to hire our teachers on as soon as possible so that they can begin to prepare and plan for their classrooms. And so we would look to bring them on at the beginning of the summer of next year. And so that's obviously where we're going to see a large So how is the school going to be funded? Where there's three different ways that we're looking at going into how we're going to fund the school. First and foremost, our school is going to be tuition funded, tuition based. All of the tuition dollars that come in from enrollment from students is what's going to fund the school. Again, we want to keep that as low and competitive as possible, but we also want to make sure that we can provide competitive salaries for our staff and faculty. We recognize that we can't pay top dollar that you might find in some of the Denver metro areas, but we also don't want to short people just because we live in a rural setting and just because it's a Christian school. We want to provide good incentive and good competitive salaries to our teachers as much as possible, because we recognize that the better we can treat our teachers, the more likely they're going to stay here for the long term and help us develop our programs and develop our classes, which ultimately is good for the students. Secondly, like I said earlier, we want to create the school as a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. This has been recommended to us by the lawyers that we've discussed this with. What this does is it removes the liability from Strasburg Community Church in the event that something doesn't work out for the school. The church is not liable for it. This is from a legal perspective as much as a financial perspective. It also gives us the opportunity to accept tax-exempt donations from individuals and corporations that might want to help support the school financially. And so becoming a 501c3 helps us to be able to do that. And then lastly, as we pursue financial options for how to best finance the operation for the school, what we would be looking for at this point would be for the church to possibly co-sign our loan so that the school can then get the financing for that. Now keep in mind, we have not had the chance to really discuss this at length with any financial institutions, so we really don't know what they're going to tell us. We don't know what they're going to say is our option. We may or may not be able to get cosigns. We may have to find some other way to do this. But as we move forward, this is kind of the plan that we're pursuing, that the school as its own 501c3 would seek the financing, and then the church as an established organization would possibly co-sign on that. Again, that could change as we meet with financial institutions, whether they're local banks or something outside of our local area. But our desire is to make sure that whatever financing we do secure for the school limits the liability on SEC as much as possible, and also provides us with a low interest and low time frame to pay all that back, again, so we can become as financially secure as possible and self-sustaining as a school. So what are some of the long-term goals for our school, and what does the impact look like on Strasburg Community Church? Well, some of our long-term goals, again, we want to grow, we want to continue to thrive and meet the needs of our students and families. Our first goal is to become self-supporting and sustainable as much as possible. Again, we don't want a school that is dependent on outside resources, because we want to be independent enough to govern ourselves the way that we see fit and the way that God is leading us. Eventually, we want to expand into a full kindergarten through 12th grade offerings. We recognize that that's going to be years down the road, but we want to be able to grow into high school. At some point, we would love to be able to get full accreditation for our educational process. And that's not something that would come until we have grown to our full educational capacity, because it's a very costly endeavor and a very time-consuming endeavor, and every time we add a grade, we have to go back through the accreditation process. But at some point, we would like to get fully accredited. And if you're not sure what accreditation means, it's basically a stamp of approval from a nationally recognized organization that says, yes, your educational program, what you're doing is high quality and it meets certain standards. We do fully intend on meeting those standards regardless of accreditation. We do want to make sure that everything that we do is very high quality and meets the standards, so that when it does come time for accreditation, we don't have any surprises, and we can go to that accrediting body and say, we're already doing this, so it'll help us out. Also, we want to be able to offer tuition scholarships to families that are in need at some point. At some point, we'd also love to be able to develop sports programs, whether that's here at the church and at the school, or it's partnering with other local sports programs to have sports teams. And then finally, at some point, especially when we get into high school education, we'd like to develop partnerships with community colleges and trade schools. Many schools in the areas currently offer a degree program where you can graduate from high school and at the same time get your associate's degree. And we think that's a very valuable program, and we would love the chance to be able to do that as well. And so that's another long-term goal that we would like to look into for the future as well. So what is the impact going to look like on SCC? Obviously, starting a school is a high-intensity decision to make, and there's going to be an impact on Strasburg Community Church. Ultimately, we want to make sure that everything that we do is cooperative, and that we minimize and reduce the impact on Strasburg Community Church programming as much as possible. And so one of the things we want to be able to do is have cooperative use of space. And so this diagram here just shows a general overview of what the church looks like in the layout. The areas that are highlighted in red are the areas that we would like to be able to designate as classroom space. These rooms would be set up all the time as classrooms with desks and chairs and whiteboards and things like that. So any day of the week when you walk into them, they would look like a normal school classroom. That areas that are highlighted in yellow are areas that we've designated as flexible space. These areas might not necessarily be set up permanently as classroom spaces or other spaces, but they're areas that if we need to use them, we would be able to use them. So for instance, the yellow space up here, if you're familiar with downstairs, is kind of our Awana game room. And it provides a good opportunity, a good space for when the weather is not too good, the kids can go inside and still be able to do recess and PE and things like that. We do want to make sure that in the cooperative use of space, that the church is still able to use it. We don't want to develop this persona that this is school space and you can't use it as a church, not at all. We want to make sure that the church has the opportunity, the ministries, the individuals, the meetings that take place, can still use all of these spaces whenever they need to outside of school programming hours. Because we recognize that if we start to divide space that way, that it's not cooperative, it starts to create issues between the church and the school, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen at all. There is obviously going to need to be adjustments in church programming during school hours, whether that's because of safety and security reasons or simply because of the way that spaces are being used. We're going to have to make some adjustments in church programming. Our desire, though, is to make sure that the ministries that meet during the day and in the evenings can still continue to do that. We're just going to have to figure another way to move some things around because we don't want to negatively impact the church's ability to continue to perform ministry because that is first and foremost our number one goal. And then lastly, there's going to be some financial responsibilities that the church would have, especially if they need to co-sign on a loan or other things that we're going to need to do in the building to make sure that we can get things up to code the way that the county would require us to do it. So what does our process look like? How are we going to make this happen? Well, there's some steps that we need to go through to make this happen. The first one's already been accomplished, and that was a few weeks ago we met with Adams County Planning Department and had a conceptual review. And basically what this was we presented our plan to them, and we had the chance to meet one-on-one with them, and they told us their opinion of the project, which they had a very high opinion. They were excited, they were encouraged, because even they recognized the need for more schools in the area. But there were some things that came out of that meeting that they prepared us for to say, if you decide to move forward with this, there are some things that you're going to need to do. One of those I'd love to share with you, and that is that they would like to see us pave Aspen Road. And if you don't know where Aspen Road is, it is that humongous highway right behind the food bank that is covered in dirt. That is actually Aspen Road, and it's considered a road. They had a special name. I always forget that name. Collector Road. There we go. It's a collector road that feeds the rest of the community. And so because we are looking to put a school here, they would want us to pave that road. That is no small task. That is very expensive. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And just to be transparent, that very much is a make or break deal that we would have to navigate. We are confident that God has a plan for it, though, and we continue to look to Him to provide for us, knowing that He's going to work out all the details if this is what He would want us to do. But that is just one of the things that that came out of the conceptual review that Adams County Planning Department would want us to do is to pave that road. And so again, we're looking into that and what it would take, what we would need to do, and what other options might exist. The next step in this process is to formally submit a development application. Knowing what we may or may not have to do, we still have to go through a formal application process, which would consist of meetings with Adams County, meetings with the community, and other things like that. And then out of that, we would hopefully be able to get our provisional use permit, which would provisionally allow us to start our school. This process takes around 4 to 6 months from the time that we submit that application to the time where we finally complete it. During this time is when we would have to bring things up to code, and we have been very blessed as a church excuse me, to have someone at our disposal. Tim Strasburg, who's sitting with us today, has extensive experience in this arena. He worked formerly with the city of Aurora as one of their engineers, and so for him this is old hat. And so he has been working closely with us as we've been developing this stuff and working towards our presentations for the county. And so we're confident that especially with him on our side, we'll be able to find favor with the county and make things happen. So once we've done all the application process, that's when they would then grant us a permit to actually start our school. And again, our desire is to start that in fall of next year of 2019 is when we hope to be able to launch. But we recognize there is a long process that we still have to go through to make sure that we meet all the state and local requirements to start a school. On a school level, our timeline for things looks like this. Right now, we are in the process of sharing all the information, which again is why you're here today. And in a few weeks as a church, on the 30th, we're going to be having our congregational meeting where we're going to then vote, asking our church to affirm God's plan for this to actually happen. Once we have that affirmation, then that allows us to kind of start the ball rolling on the financial and legal aspects of things. This is when we'll be able to go secure our 501c3 filing, and we already actually have an accountant that has contacted us to say that they would take care of all of that for us pro bono, which actually saves us a couple $1,000, so we're blessed by that. We would also have the chance to then meet with some financial institutions to ask them the question, what is the best way to go about doing that? And so once we have both of those pieces, the nonprofit and the financing secured, that would then allow us to hire on our principal so that she can start the ball rolling with the development of our educational process. Looking a little bit further, once we get that done, that allows us to kind of go into our development phase, which is where we put together all of our marketing, our website, and then also start to form committees of people such as yourselves that would want to be involved in this process. Educational committees, curriculum committees, zoning and planning committees, things like that. People that would come together and assist us in making all this happen over the year to come. And then in January, Lord willing, we would start probably our pre-enrollment phase where we're able to introduce the school to students and families that might potentially want to join with us and then possibly pre-enroll them, which would then lead us into our programming phase between January and April, where we really get the chance to develop a lot of our educational programmings, selecting of our curriculum, and then start the hiring and interviewing process with our staff and faculty. And then that leads us to the last phase of the project, our launch and enrollment phase, during the months of April through August, where we have our open houses, where we are able to then formally enroll students and families into the program to get us an idea of what the fall is going to look like. So it's a busy schedule, it's an audacious schedule, but again, we're confident with God's leading and people such as yourselves that are supporting this desire, this project, that we'll be able to get this stuff done in time for fall of next year. So in summary, to wrap all this up, our desire is to start a 501c3 nonprofit tuition-based Christian school. We want that school to have small blended classrooms that consist of experiential learning and STEM education in our 4-in-1 week. We have a desire to grow into a full kindergarten through 12th grade grade offerings with strategic educational partnerships, as well as full accreditation at some point in the future. And again, our desire is to start this all in the fall of next year. So it's a big undertaking. There's a lot to be done. I know it might seem at first glance that we've already done a lot, but the reality is it's only the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more that still needs to be done. And we're excited about what God has in store for us. We look forward